Good morning and thank you so much for joining us on Africa This Morning. It is the 18th of March 2014. Let's start the bulletin with a look at the headlines.
Attacks in Nigeria. 100 villagers killed in Nigeria's central Kaduna state. Crimea decides. Crimeans vote overwhelmingly to join Russia. Libyan oil tanker reclaimed. US takes control of tanker full of oil loaded from a rebel-held port in Libya.
The search area has been significantly expanded and the nature of the search has changed.
Missing plane investigations. Malaysian police investigating the personal, political and religious backgrounds of the pilots and crew.
The EU has imposed travel bans and asset freezes against 21 officials from Russia and Ukraine following Crimea's referendum on joining Russia. This happened after Crimea's parliament formally declared independence from Ukraine and asked to join the Russian Federation.
This decision follows Sunday's controversial referendum which was in support of leaving Ukraine and joining Russia. The region will now adopt Russian currency and will move to Moscow time within a month. The document approved by MPs also appealed to all countries of the world to recognize it as an independent state. The government in Kiev has said it will not recognize the results. The Crimean Peninsula has been under the control of pro-Russia forces since late February. Moscow says the troops are pro-Russian self-defense forces and not under its direct control. The crisis follows the ousting of Ukraine's pro-Moscow president Viktor Yanukovych on 22nd February, following months of street protests and deadly clashes. The US and EU say the vote was illegal and have vowed to impose sanctions on Moscow.
As a result, as you know, we propose to move to a further stage of the European response today with travel bans and asset freezes on individuals.
28 EU foreign ministers met after the referendum, which many term illegal, improper and in violation of Moscow's own international commitments to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
You can't simply sit back and say this situation can be allowed to happen. So, first of all, we have to think very carefully about what the response ought to be, and there should be a response.
The ministers reiterated the need for a diplomatic solution, urging Moscow to begin talks on solving the worst crisis in Europe since the end of the Cold War.
At the same time, every diplomatic channel remains open to Russia.
The referendum on breaking from Ukraine and joining Russia was called by Crimean parliament in earlier March, with voters asked to choose between joining Russia or having great autonomy within Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian parliament in Kiev has formally approved the partial mobilization of 40,000 reservists in response to what it called wartime situation.
At least 100 villagers have been killed in Nigeria's central Kaduna state in attacks linked to land, religion and ethnicity disputes. The unrest in central Nigeria is not usually linked to the insurgency in the northeast by Boko Haram.
Heavily armed men entered 3 villages in the Kaura district in the south of the state. It's not clear who was behind the attacks, but residents blame herdsmen from the Fulani community. The attacks in Kaduna came only a day after reports emerged of 69 people being killed over several days in northern Katsina state, where dozens of armed men arrived in villages on motorbikes. The unrest is not linked to the insurgency in northeast by Boko Haram, which wants to impose Sharia law in northern Nigeria.
The murder trial of South African Paralympic star Oscar Pistorius entered its 3rd week with a firearms service provider due to take the witness stand. The firearms specialist told the court that the athlete had good knowledge on gun use rules.
Sean Patrick Rains is involved in firearms assessment for licenses and met Pistorius in 2012. He sold Pistorius a Smith & Wesson 500 and had ordered 4 more guns, including 2 shotguns, LM6 civilian assault rifle, and 2 revolvers, including an A38 Special. The order was cancelled a month after his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp was killed. Rains read out a competency questionnaire and examination that Pistorius had completed before he could be issued with a firearm. He scored top marks in these tests, which included questions about the rules when you're allowed to legally shoot an intruder. Last week, South African police faced further embarrassment at the trial when it emerged a valuable watch had vanished from the crime scene and a ballistics expert had handled the athlete's gun without gloves. Pistorius denies the premeditated murder of his girlfriend Steenkamp on Valentine's Day last year, saying he shot her in a tragic accident after mistaking her for a nighttime intruder.
In an approach that is expected to boost information gathered on the missing Malaysian Airlines plane, the Malaysian police are now investigating the personal, political and religious backgrounds of the pilots and the crew of the missing jetliner in a bid to find leads that would shed some light on the whereabouts of the plane.
It's been more than 1 week since the Malaysia airliner jet went missing, and still the authorities are no closer to understanding why the aircraft flew hundreds of miles off course. The search is now scouring a vast area from Central Asia to the southern Indian Ocean. The shift comes after the tracking data revealed that Flight 370 was diverted by someone who knew how to switch off its communication system. Malaysia has contacted countries including the US, China and France for further satellite data. No trace has been found of the Beijing-bound plane since it went missing last Saturday, about an hour after takeoff from Kuala Lumpur.
The search area has been significantly expanded and the nature of the search has changed. From focusing mainly on shallow seas, we are now looking at large tracts of land, crossing 11 countries as well as deep and remote oceans. The number of countries involved in the search and rescue operation has increased from 14 to 25.
Homes of the pilots have already been investigated. Authorities are collecting information on the rest of the crew and passengers. For the families and loved ones of the 239 people aboard, tensions boiled over Sunday in the Chinese capital.
When we have definite information or once we have seen our family members' faces, then we will go home together. If the Malaysian government or the staff of Malaysian Airlines provokes our anger, pushes our psychological limits anymore, they will be responsible for the consequences.
9 days after the plane went missing, patience is running thin. But for some, there is now a glimmer of hope that their loved ones are still alive.
The U.S. has taken control of a tanker full of oil loaded from a rebel-held port in Libya. The raid by Navy SEAL took place in international waters off the coast of Cyprus. Libya's Prime Minister Ali Zidane was dismissed by Parliament last week after the commercial tanker Morning Glory evaded a naval blockade to leave the rebel-held port.
No one was hurt when U.S. forces, at the request of both the Libyan and Cypriot governments, boarded and took control of the commercial tanker Morning Glory, a stateless vessel seized earlier this month by 3 armed Libyans. Libyan rebels controlling 3 oil export ports said over the weekend they were ready to negotiate with the government over ending their 6-month blockade if Tripoli abandoned plans for military offensive. Libyan officials on Wednesday gave the armed protesters 2 weeks to clear the ports they have seized or face a military strike. Pro-government and rebel forces clashed briefly this week in central Sirte city, linking western and eastern Libya. The rebels, who are calling for a greater share in the OPEC nation's oil wealth, managed last week to load oil onto a tanker which escaped the Libyan Navy.
Algeria's premier visited a town at the edge of the Sahara on Sunday where 3 people were killed in communal violence between Arabs and the Berbers. The Prime Minister, who was also accompanied by the Interior Minister Taib Belaise, who met with local leaders to discuss the situation on the ground.
The UNESCO World Heritage Site on the edge of the Sahara Desert has since December been rocked by clashes between the Chamba community of Arab origin and the majority Mozabites, Berbers belonging to the Ibadi Muslim sect. Though calm has been restored in the town, police have launched an investigation into the violence. Late Saturday, 3 people were killed, though it was not immediately clear to which community they belonged. According to a hospital source, another 89 people were wounded in the clashes, including 29 members of the security forces. Two Mozambique doctors said more than 100 people had been wounded, but many of them had not gone to hospital for fear of being arrested. Berbers represent at least 30% of the Algerian population and have long considered themselves marginalized by the country's Arab majority. Analysts have warned the sectarian violence in Gardaia, which was inflamed by the destruction of a historic Berber shrine in late December last year, could spread across the region. The two communities have coexisted for centuries, but limited economic opportunities, despite Algeria's vast oil and gas wealth, have aggravated tensions. According to a local leader, the latest clashes erupted when members of some 200 Mozambique families, driven out by the mixed Haji Massoud quarter in January, returned to inspect their homes.
As Pakistan grapples with the crippling energy crisis, people in one corner of Kashmir have taken matters into their own hands using small-scale turbines to generate electricity from streams and rivers.
Waterfalls as far as the eye can see. The waters of Pakistan's Kashmir region flow with such force that locals decided to put it to use to produce electricity.
This machine was installed with a share from 50 families, which cost us 300,000 rupees. We started this small hydro scheme as we needed it. We only get light from it and no other electric appliances. We start this turbine at 3 in the afternoon and switch it off the next day at 8 a.m.
Pakistan is in the grip of one of the worst energy crises of its history, and some areas are simply excluded from the national grid, like half of this valley. So the villagers turn to these homemade turbines to transform their daily lives.
When we had no electricity, there was always smoke, as we use wood for heating and cooking, which causes diseases. Since we installed this project, thanks be to God, we have gotten rid of these diseases and gained other benefits.
But this isn't enough to supply everyone. Every year, Kashmir's forests are gradually cut down to provide wood to burn.
Cutting down trees is a big loss. Using wood for heating and cooking causes health problems. If the hydel is promoted and new projects are set up, it will fulfill all the requirements of the people, like cooking and heating, and it will save the cutting down of green trees.
Kashmir has a huge potential for hydroelectric power, but at the moment, dams like these are only producing just over 10% of their capacity. The electricity generated goes to the grid, and not much is left for the people who live here.
All the beauty of the Neelam Valley is dependent upon these forests, these streams, this neat and clean water, and this can only be sustained if we are giving them the clean energy, which is the hydel energy.
The local government has promised a large-scale dam, slated to be finished by 2016. While they wait for projects and investment to arrive, the people of Kashmir will have to rely on themselves.
And still on environment, Paris has launched alternate driving days for the first time in nearly 20 years to tackle the dangerous air pollution levels amid controversy on whether the ban is warranted or will yield results. But the head of an association campaigning for cleaner air slammed the measures as too little, too late.
It's only the first time since 1997 that the French authorities have resorted to such a drastic measure. Today, only motorists whose cars have odd-numbered registration plates will be allowed to drive. On Tuesday, if the restrictions remain in place, it will be the turn of those with even-numbered plates.
The spikes in pollution are starting to diminish, and now we are implementing alternative driving days as some kind of last-minute reaction, even though it won't be effective. In my opinion, a certain number of car drivers will reject the measure, which I completely understand.
Electric and hybrid cars will be exempted from the ban, as well as any vehicle carrying 3 or more people. The president of the lobby said that if nothing was done to tackle the powerful diesel lobby, pollution would simply continue.
Pour réduire la pollution, déjà, il faudrait que le gouvernement...
To reduce pollution, the government needs to have a real action plan, and we need to be able to implement the anti-particles plan. We need a strong state that resists the lobby groups and can commit to developing economic plans for the car industry. We can draw lessons from big cities like Copenhagen and to set ambitious goals to reduce atmospheric pollutants.
De réduction des polluants atmosphériques.
The government made the announcement on Saturday after pollution particles in the air exceeded safe levels for 5 straight days in Paris and its environs. All public transport was made free over the weekend to persuade residents to leave their cars at home. It will remain free as long as the alternative driving days remain in force.
Syria's fabled desert Greco-Roman oasis of Palmyra saw its last tourist in September 2011, 6 months after the uprising began. Endless violence and looting has totally destroyed the region's tourism sector.
Ancient Palmyra now bears the scars of modern warfare, but also greed in the form of pillaged tombs. The UNESCO-listed Pearl of the Desert World Heritage Site in Homs province, just over 130 miles northeast of Damascus, was one of the most important cultural centers of the ancient world.
When the gunmen entered the city, tourism stopped. Before that, business was very good. Tourists used to come in the thousands. Restaurants and hotels had very good business. I couldn't go to my farm, but thanks to the efforts of the army, they protected us from the terrorists.
It retains its majesty today despite the tall columned temple of Baal suffering damage after a fire exchange between rebels and forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad.
At least 5,000 people worked in the tourism industry with their families. They worked in the hotels, restaurants, the tours, and as street vendors. All this business has stopped now.
في الباعة الجوالة وبعض الأعمال السياحية والخيم السياحية والجولات في المناطق الصحراوية بيقوم بها مع السائحين.
The Hellenistic building's eastern wall, its most imposing, now bears whitened slashes where the stone has been gorged by shell blast. Mortar fire has damaged one entrance and its lintel resting on 8 columns with fluted shafts. The perimeter wall has been damaged in several places. The Corinthian capitals of 3 pillars of the colonnade to the south of the temple have crashed to the ground.
Some thieves couldn't smuggle antiquities out of Syria during the crisis, so they hid them in the secret places. These collections of artifacts have been found hidden under the floor of a house in Palmyra. The authorities had found them and brought them to the National Museum.
The legendary Zonobi Palace Hotel, built on the site by a French adventurer in the 1920s and named after Palmyra's famous queen, is a ransacked and half-burnt shell.
And finally, Story Moja, a Kenyan-based publishing house in Nairobi, held a special celebration for the life of Professor Kofi Awunur. They marked his 79th birthday at the West House Hotel, remembering the life of a man who will live on in scripts sketched in black and white.
As the night fell on September the 21st terrorist attack in Nairobi, the days to come only bore the reminder of the tragedy that befell Kenya. Legendary African author and poet Kofi Awunur was amongst those who lost his life. With literature works spanning over creative and academia fields, Professor Kofi Awunur told the African story. He touched Africa with his ideology, inking it on paper and making his lifelong contribution to Africa and the world. In his remark, Ghanaian ambassador to Kenya and the permanent representative to the UNEP and United Nations Habitat, Kingsley Karimu, said that Africa's budding writers need to pick up the baton.
What we need to do is to make sure that his legacy goes on. The young generation of writers, we should try to add to the numbers. And I think this year we should make it a point to ensure that the festival is bigger than at any time in the past. just so that wherever the professor is, he would say, yes, indeed, my legacy lives on.
Happy birthday to you. Last year, we lost 3 stewards of African storytelling: Chinua Achebe, Kofi Anur, and Doris Lessing. For now, Story Moja only hopes that as Africa begins to come to terms with the loss, that their ambition to change the region culture in Kenya will bear fruit to enhance the creation of stories to express what truly is African.
We are concerned, of course, even as Story Moja, that yes, who is penning the African story? But we're very delighted that, yes, new writers, there are very many budding authors. As part of Story Moja, as part of the festival, we have a masterclass writing workshop. We run several writing workshops, all aimed at, yes, trying to kind of bring up the budding authors and give them the skills. We publish them. So much as we're stimulating the interest, we are giving you a platform to publish your work.
This balloon symbolizes who Kofi Anur was, a man full of wealth in terms of knowledge and wisdom. And so, as the world bids Kofi Anur goodbye, what is left is for young African writers to pick up the baton and follow his footsteps. Charity Chikene for Ebru, Africa TV.
And that story brings us to the end of the Bulletin on Africa this morning. I've been your host, Beryl. Ooro. Join us next as we take a look at the leading stories in the social media platform in our segment on Trend.